Following last night's presidential debate, Kamala Harris's lead over Donald Trump sits at about a point in the national polling averages. Now that is unlikely to translate over to an electoral college victory. That's because the electoral map does structurally favor the Republican Party. According to Nate Silver's forecast, a D+1 to D+2 national popular vote lead would only give Harris about a 30% chance of winning. Today, I'm going to take you through my latest predictions for the outcomes in every single state, blending analysis of the latest polls with past polling errors, demographic data, shifts and trends, and of course, the betting markets, all in an effort to provide you with the most comprehensive analysis possible on who is on track to win this race in November. Let's start with the safe states for both candidates. Former President Donald Trump is almost certain to hold Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia, the southern states of Tennessee, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Missouri. Then there's Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska's statewide contest and the 1st and 3rd districts, South and North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and finally, Alaska. Trump carried each of these states by more than 10 percentage points in the 2020 election and should again in November. Now Kamala Harris will carry Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii, the Pacific Coast Blue Wall. Then there's Colorado and Illinois, and up in the Northeast, New York, Maine's 1st District, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and finally, the District of Columbia. Now, each of these states backed Joe Biden by more than 10 points in 2020 and have not voted for a Republican presidential candidate in at least 20 years. Taking a look at the race to 270 electoral votes now, Harris has 191, Trump has 125. 17 states remain in play for both candidates, and I will now assign a rating to each of them based on how strongly they lean toward either party. First up, the likely states. Now, as the name implies, these are likely to go to one candidate, very likely at that, but an upset is not out of the question, like it is in the solid states. For Trump, this includes the Midwest tandem of Iowa, 6 electoral votes, and Ohio with 17 electoral votes. Now, this is a tandem because they have followed nearly identical trends over the last decade and a half, voting Democrat for Barack Obama in 2008 and again in 2012, before then jolting hard to the right in favor of Trump in 2016 by a margin of 9 points in Iowa and 8 points in Ohio, and then again in 2020 by 8 points each. It was Trump's strength among working class, especially white, non-college educated voters here in these two states that has put them almost entirely out of reach for Democrats at this point. I fully expect Trump to carry both Iowa and Ohio by around 8 to 10 points again. The former president is also heavily favored to hold the 2nd largest state in the nation, Texas, and the 3rd largest, Florida, 30 and 40 electoral votes, respectively. Here in Texas, Trump's margin did drop from 9 points in 2016 to just 5.5 in 2020, as Biden received the highest Democratic vote share, 46.5%, since Texas last went blue in 1976. But this may prove to be the party's peak, unless they can suddenly roll back the unprecedented Republican gains among Hispanic voters down here in the Rio Grande Valley that actually helped Trump win the same share as he did in 2016, 52%. And now here in 2024, the polls do show Trump expanding his margin up to more than 7 points, based on an average of the last 3 polls. Now moving on to Florida, along a key swing state, yet like Ohio and like Iowa, it has lurched to the right in the Trump era. He carried it by more than 3 points in 2020. It's one of only 5 states in which he actually improved his margin compared to 2016. Then in the 2022 midterms, Republican incumbents Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio were both re-elected in landslide fashion, both by more than 15 points each. And now, just like Texas, we do see the former president expanding his lead in Florida up to 6 points here based on the last 5 polls, all of which show Trump up by at least 3 points. Alrighty, back to the map. Those 4 states lift Trump's electoral tally up to 218. Now let's get to the likely blue states. Harris is heavily favored in New Mexico, 5 electoral votes. It voted for Biden by 11 points in 2020 and remains strongly in the Democratic corner, with the only poll showing Harris up by 10. She is also likely to hold the statewide contest up in Maine in the Democratic column, one of two states with Nebraska that split their electoral votes, awarding 2 to the statewide winner and 1 per district. Now, Maine has consistently voted blue at the presidential level since 1988, and both of the polls so far, surveyed here in 2024, show Harris up by a very wide margin. So that wraps up the likely states. Now, Harris's tally has been raised to 198 as she trails Trump in the race to 270, heading into the lean states. Before we get there, though, only about 20% of my viewers are actually subscribed to my channel, so please take this second to subscribe below. It's completely free, and it does help me continue to make content like this. Alrighty, now the lean states have about a 65 to 80% chance of voting one way. I would be surprised, but not entirely shocked if they don't. Starting with VP Harris this time, she should hold the state of Minnesota in her corner, where her running mate, Tim Walz, currently serves as governor. Now, Minnesota voted for Joe Biden by 7 points in the 2020 election, and while the polls showed a much tighter race while Biden was still in the race, Harris has now led in both of the polls since he dropped out by at least 5 points. Ultimately, if Harris does win this election, she should carry Minnesota by at least 4 points. Anything less would be trouble. The same thing can actually be said for the Commonwealth of Virginia and the state of New Hampshire as well. Virginia voted for Biden by 10 points in the 2020 election, the first time a Democrat has carried it by double digits since 1944. It's another state where Biden was polling terribly before he dropped out. In fact, Trump even led in the Real Clear polling average in late July. Now again, though, with Harris, she has taken back the lead and then some, up more than 5 points now based on the last 3 polls. Now, Virginia is the kind of state that she should be outperforming Biden in, with a relatively high share of Black and young college-educated voters, a couple of demographic groups that Biden had been losing support with against Trump. As for the state of New Hampshire, the only truly competitive state here in the Northeast region, Trump came within half a point of defeating Hillary Clinton in 2016 before Biden then returned it comfortably into the Democratic corner by 7 in 2020. Now, Harris is still underperforming that number in the polls right now, leading by exactly 5% at this very moment. That is a similar margin to Virginia and Minnesota, and together these 3 states do lift her electoral vote tally ahead of Trump now with 225. And that will actually increase by 1 as she is also heavily favored in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. This Omaha-based district voted for Joe Biden by more than 6 points in the 2020 election. It has shifted more than 14 points to the left since Mitt Romney won it by 7 points in 2012. So Harris, again, is likely to extract an electoral vote out of a Trump state. Yet the same can be said for Trump over here in Maine, where the 2nd district leans in his direction. Completely unlike Nebraska 02, Maine 02 is extremely rural and one of the oldest and least racially diverse congressional districts in the entire country. It did vote for Trump in 2016 and again in 2020 by a margin of 7 points. Alrighty, that leaves us with the 7 key battlegrounds talked about all cycle long: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania here in the upper Rust Belt, and then North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada across the Sun Belt. Starting in the Rust Belt, this trio is often referred to as the Blue Wall states, as they each voted Democrat in 6 straight presidential cycles between 1992 and 2012, before Trump broke through in 2016, flipping all 3 by less than a single percentage point. Now, Joe Biden did return them to the Democratic column in 2020 by a little more than a point in Pennsylvania, almost 3 points in Michigan, and less than a point in Wisconsin. This trio did prove decisive in both cycles. Had Hillary Clinton held them against Trump, he would never have been elected president. And then had Trump held them against Biden, he would still be serving a 2nd term at this very moment. Now here in 2024, they could very well again decide the election. Polls in all 3 remain within the margin of error. The average in Pennsylvania is exactly tied. In Michigan, we see Harris leading by a little more than a point, and the same can be said in Wisconsin. The vice president leads Trump by 1.5%. Now, all three of these averages do suggest that the race is a toss-up. I strongly encourage you against making any strong conclusions based on just a 1 or 2 point lead. All they really mean is that the race is close. In that vein, all three are truly toss-ups, but as this is a prediction channel, I'm going to give you my honest forecast for the outcome in November. Right now, I do have Harris as the slight favorite in Michigan. It is fundamentally the bluest of the three, and it'll take quite a push for Trump to flip enough voters here in just 4 years. Comparatively, the 2020 margins were closer in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and contrary to the polls, in the latter, I have Wisconsin as tilting toward the former president. That is largely driven by the fact that polls have greatly underestimated Trump here in the past. Both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden led Trump by far greater margins than Harris does now. And again, Clinton lost, while Biden only won by 0.6%. Wisconsin is also the most rural and the whitest, and does have a lower share of college-educated voters than either Michigan or Pennsylvania. For those reasons, many analysts do project that Wisconsin will trend to the right in the future. The question here in 2024, though, is whether the issue of abortion can rally enough Democrats to hold it for now. That could happen, but I have Trump slightly favored right now. As for Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, in name and practice, it is the most important state in this election, as its 19 electoral votes are the most likely to tip the race in either direction. Again, it's a matter of which candidate has a slightly better than 50% chance of winning, and again, right now, my answer to that question is Donald Trump. Harris is just fundamentally a weaker candidate in the Rust Belt than she is in the Sun Belt. She simply does not carry the same appeal to older working-class white voters that Joe Biden had in 2020. And that is why you see her struggling to build a consistent lead in the states, unlike Joe Biden, who led by at least 4 points all cycle, sometimes by as much as 6 or even 7 points. On that note, it is another state that Trump has tended to overperform in, and so if I had to give one candidate an edge, it would be him. As for the Sunbelt region now, lots of moving parts. Again, not a whole lot of clarity though. Trump has consistently polled better in all 4 states, but on a previous results and demographic trend level, they are each more friendly to Democrats. As things currently stand, Kamala Harris leads in Nevada by 0.6%. She has led in 4 of the last 7 polls. As for the state of Arizona, she trails Trump here as he leads by 1.6% and has led in 5 of the last 8 polls, with actually just 1 showing Harris in the lead. In Georgia, Trump leads by just 0.3%, with the latest poll from Quinnipiac University showing him up by 3. Harris had led in 3 of the previous 5. Finally, in North Carolina, surprisingly, it is the closest of the 4, as Trump's lead is only 0.1%, with a full 10 polls included in this average, of which Trump has led in 6 and Harris in 4, including the last 2, both by 3 percentage points. Ultimately, though, again, in each case, the current margin is entirely within the margin of error. Neither candidate has a clear edge in the polls, and considering how close they were in 2020, it's not like the fundamentals are very strong in either direction either. Biden held Nevada by 2.4%, he flipped Arizona by 0.3%, and Georgia by 0.2%, while Trump held on to North Carolina by 1.4%. Now, as for the betting markets, they give Trump a slight edge in each state. He's at 51% in Nevada, 59% in Arizona, 58% in Georgia, and then 56% in North Carolina. And on that note, back on my map, I have North Carolina as tilting Republican, as well as the states of Georgia and Arizona, while Nevada is tilting towards Harris. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, part of my rationale behind these ratings is my gut feeling. For what it's worth, I did correctly predict every single state but Georgia in 2020, so I like to think that my gut has some credibility. Anyways, that does it for this 2024 presidential election map prediction and analysis. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with these ratings in the comments below. Again, make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to become a member, go ahead and click the join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Please leave a like on the video down below if you did indeed enjoy it. And again, make sure to subscribe while you're down there as well. Check out more content from my channel here. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.